Interesting letter that comes from Mike Oresco. Don't recognize that name? He is the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference, the AAC.
And he's fed up.
He has had it up to here, and then some.
He's mad as hell, and he's not going to take it anymore.
And kind of takes shot at the ACC.
Which I loved, by the way.
The ACC kind of put itself out there on Front Street as, well, we're against expanding to 12 teams in the playoff, and here's why. Health and safety issues and blah, 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 blah. Well, Mike Oresco laid out what was going on in the talks about the college football playoff expansion. He talked about the fact that everybody was on board with what the working committee, made up of Greg Sankey and Jack Swarbrick and Craig Thompson and Bob Bowlesby, put together. That fans and media and consumers of college football, everybody was on board except for a couple of conference commissioners who have their panties fully wadded up. My words, not his.
No. His words, just he said them nicer than you.
Yeah. Here's part of Mike Oresco's letter, to whom it may concern. In our view, there are two main issues. One is the ACC's publicly registered opposition to expanding the playoff to current time, citing health and safety concerns, as well as the uncertainty and instability of the current college sports landscape. The other is a proposal advanced relatively recently by a few conferences for a 5+1 format, which would award automatic qualification to the 5 current NCAA autonomy conferences, the A5, more colloquially known as the Power 5, which he also references, Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Big 12, Pac-12, and which would award one slot to the top-rated so-called Group of 5 champion. I love that he threw so-called in there.
Exactly.
Other issues include the position of contract bowls, including the Rose Bowl and an expanded playoff, revenue distribution under a new plan, and the location of first and second round games. Home sites are in bowls, but there is reason to believe these other issues can be successfully addressed. He goes on to talk about the health and safety concerns and the fact that there really shouldn't be any. And you know what? He used some 1 + 1 = 2 logic in here. He said, the reality is there is a strong likelihood that one of the 4 teams that gets a first-round bye, the 1, 2, 3, or 4 seed, will ultimately play in the championship game. In which case, there would be only one more game than is currently required to win a national championship. And he points out that in the event that one of the seeds 5 through 12 actually earns their way to the college football national championship game, they probably would not cite a concern in having to play one more game because guess what? They now have access to a championship that they would not have otherwise had access to. And oh, by the way,
brilliant point.
Let's put a little bit of responsibility on the schools playing in the games that if they are concerned about student-athlete welfare, that they will adjust their practice and preparation schedules accordingly to make sure that their student-athletes are taken care of.
Elect this guy president. He just made more sense than anybody in America has.
It's so simple, yet so accurate. He also pointed out that college football could use a rule change or two. Get this, the Super Bowl last night didn't last as long as a lot of college football games this year.
most college
including halftime.
Including that gaudy halftime. Ole Miss, Texas A&M, for example, longer football game than the Super Bowl. That should never happen. Quick change here. This is from Chris Vanini. There's less hurry-up offense in the NFL, but a lot of people are pointing to how in college, clock stops on a first down.
Yeah.
In the NFL, it does not. It just runs. If you get a first down, the clock is running. Last night, the Rams ran 66 plays. The Bengals ran 61. In the national championship game in college football, Georgia ran 78 plays, so that's 12 more, and Alabama ran 70. That's an additional 9.
Don't you think that number would go down even with hurry-up offenses if you went to NFL clock rules?
Yes, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
Clock stops on a first down in the last 2 minutes of the first half and the last 2 minutes of the game. Otherwise, you don't stop the clock to move the chains for a first down. You just move the chains and keep on playing. And in the event that you have one of those deals where the chain gang is still using an actual chain and not digital markers, and it gets tangled up and stopped, well, okay, stop the game, get them straightened out, and then move on.
And it bears repeating, Oresco didn't do it here, but it bears repeating the FCS National Championship game is played by two teams that play 15 games. It's their 15th game of the season, with 22 fewer scholarships to offer their players.
Yeah.
They have two sides of the ball fewer players on their roster, and they play 15 games without issue.
You know, he actually also circled to the idea that the ACC, talks about with the uncertainty and future. And he says this, as for the turmoil, excuse me. Sorry, guys, I'm struggling today.
It's quite all right.
As for the turmoil and uncertainty
Buddy, that's every
surrounding...
day for me. Don't feel bad.
Yeah. As for the turmoil and uncertainty surrounding college sports and NCAA governance, there is no question that issues such as name, image, and likeness, the transfer portal, NCAA divisional governance, the implications of the Alston Supreme Court decision, and the academic calendar, the list goes on, must be addressed. There are two main points to be made here. One, these issues do not bear directly on whether to expand the college playoff. An expanded playoff is about enhancing opportunity regardless of what the future of college sports looks like. Second, these overarching issues will likely be debated long into the future and, in fact, are unlikely to be settled in any meaningful way in the next 15 months or so, when the college football playoff decision makers will have to reconvene either to develop a new playoff plan for 26 and beyond, continue with the 4-team model, or abandon a playoff altogether if an acceptable model cannot be agreed upon. The common sense meter is pegging in the red on this letter from Mike Oresco.
And no wonder the AAC's been so successful recently.
Hey, and how about when he takes the ACC's argument and wads it up into a ball and says, hey, guys, boom, and throws it right back in their face. Like here.
Love it. I love it.
The ACC has said it favors an expanded playoff eventually, which suggests that it believes that health and safety concerns can be addressed satisfactorily. The prevailing feeling is that the most likely outcome in 2026 and beyond is a 12-team playoff. The 8-team model that some conferences have supported, which would limit at-large participation, simply does not have enough traction to be a viable alternative. Therefore, if a 12-team playoff is a likely outcome anyway, and there is unanimity in favoring expansion down the road, why not try to implement an expanded playoff sooner than later in order to afford deserving teams and their student athletes the opportunity to play for a national championship? Why delay it? Or, worst case,
Fear this is going to get stupid. Because despite that being very good, all he said was normal, rational thought. That's all that was. And do you realize how unique that was?
Not just in sports.
Just in life. That's what I'm afraid of, is that a voice like his, and honestly like Greg Sankey's, who's just like, I'll expand because it's better for the sport, but I'm good with 4 because we're dominating you. Aside from those two guys, I fear that there's a lot of individual agendas that will not mesh and nothing's going to get done.
But I'm not 100% sure that I agree with that. I think it's that you've got two ridiculous voices out there that are holding up everything, and those are the voices of the ACC and the Big Ten. Because Greg Sankey's on board. Obviously, Mike Oresco from the AAC is on board. Bob Bowlesby's like, yeah, have you seen what the future makeup of our conference is? You give us an automatic qualifying spot for the college football playoff every single year for our conference champion. I'm in. George Kliavkoff at the Pac-12 is like, look, man, we can't get anybody into the playoff period. We'll vote for anything that expands it, especially something that guarantees we get a team in. Jack Swarbrick at Notre Dame, he was part of the working group that put together the proposal that said, hey, let's go with this. And by the way, Kevin Warren and I never can remember the new guy at the ACC's name. Former athletic director at Northwestern, Jim Phillips. Jim Phillips, who has been so incredibly disappointing in his short time as the leader of the ACC.
Well, who was the old commissioner? What's his name?
John Swofford.
If he was still in charge, is it different?
Yes.
You think he's on board with everybody else?
Yeah.
So
look,
why
the ACC and the SEC had their squabbles, and it had largely to do with a bit of a measuring contest as it pertains to conference network channels and promises that were made and then weren't necessarily kept. But there was a solid working relationship there between Greg Sankey and John Swofford.
So this guy's just trying to be his own man to the detriment of college football, basically.
Yes. I mean, it's the Big Ten commissioner and a former Big Ten AD who's now the head of the ACC.
Kevin Warren was a decent football player when he was in the pros, but
he
not so
sucks
much
as a conference commissioner.
Oh, okay, I was going to be a little kinder, but yes. I mean, what has he done right?
Nothing.
Since he took that job.
Short-sighted and narrow-minded.
Just tried to cancel college football.
You think we'd be having this conversation if it was still Jim Delaney in the Big Ten and John Swofford in the ACC?
No, I don't. But I wanted to know what you thought, so that's why I asked.
No, I don't. And so, Borky, I understand your premise, but I don't think it's so much. Because I think you got a lot of people that can look at this and go, you know what, this makes a lot of sense. But you got two morons that are holding the whole thing up.
Does there need to be unanimity?
Unanimity?
Nailed it.
One syllable extra there. It's okay.
Does there need to be? Does this have to be a unanimous vote? That answer is yes, right?
No.
No, so they don't need it.
There does not have to be unanimity among the 10 conference commissioners and Jack Swarbrick. What are you laughing about?
I was thinking about that scene in
Finding Nemo.
I was thinking of "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?" Where just like, I'm with you, fellers. I don't know. I just whatever he says.
There does not have to be unanimity.
The accompaniment. That's what
but it looks a whole lot better if there is. Like they can take their plan and they can say, look, there are 11 of us, and 7 of us are for this and 4 are against it, and then they hand it off to the Board of Governors, of which Mark Keenum is chair. And they say, we have majority. We can't call it consensus because we don't have this, once we reach a majority, everybody says, okay, we're for it. We don't have unanimity, but we do have majority. Here, this is what we're proposing. In which case, the Board of Governors, which is made up of university presidents, has got to decide that that's the group that has to be unanimous in terms of their recommendation for changing the playoff. And I don't know that you get that when you've got university presidents that represent schools from their conferences. The thing that strikes me in all of this is you've got two conference commissioners who are standing in the way of growth and opportunity for college football as a whole. And for what reason? To protect the Rose Bowl? Because of a sham argument about health and safety? And because you say we don't know what the future of college athletics looks like? So by all means, let's not do something that would be good for college football as a whole. Let's just roll with it. Lee says when the contract expires, there's nothing to prevent the SEC from staging their own 4 or 8-team playoff from their 16 teams. Lee, I think it would be unlikely for the SEC to try to have its own playoff. I think when the contract expires, if the ACC and the Big Ten are still playing this game, I think that's when you get into the possible conversation of the SEC saying, we don't really need this. In football, we are going to break away. We are going to form our own entity. Is there anybody else out there that would like to join us? Now, it's probably not that public. It's probably not that straightforward.
What interview did you do recently where that was just casually dropped in like it was nothing? Was it the Keith Carter one? Where a breakaway was just dropped in the conversation like, yeah, that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, but it was based
Keith,
on
right?
Yeah, but it was based. I asked him about something that Greg Sankey had said recently. Because I asked him about, the comment that Greg Sankey had made about, look, if about the SEC not re-engaging in contract talks. Maybe I should have followed up on that.
Well, but it was just so casual that it took me by surprise. Probably you too, but I mean, sorry, Keith, if you're listening and I'm misrepresenting your words, but he said breakaway. He didn't say it was going to happen, didn't say I'm supporting it, none of that. He didn't say any of that, but he did mention that thing happening, which I think is significant.
Yeah, it was when I asked him about the movement on the college football playoff and the frustration that exists there, and he talked about Greg Sankey's leadership and, leading the league in the right direction. And I said, he also talked about the possibility of the SEC not being willing to engage. And that's kind of where that came from. So, fascinating time. Dave says if the SEC pulled away, what happens to basketball, baseball, and fast pitch? Well, either you pull away in football only and you stick with the NCAA with everything else, or you pull all your sports out. And guess what? You got all the best in all those sports.
I mean, it's not exactly the same, but we kind of already have that in other sports. I know it's not the same. Football and men's basketball are the moneymakers. But like South Carolina, for example, if I remember correctly, has a men's soccer team that plays in Conference USA.
Yeah.
So there is precedent for playing in other conferences or whatever.
The women's rifle team participates in like the Great American Rifle Conference or something like that.
Yeah, there's all like Vanderbilt has a bowling team still, right? I mean, obviously the SEC doesn't offer bowling, so
you got a couple of SEC schools that have equestrian as a scholarship sport. SEC as a whole does not sponsor equestrian.
Yeah.
We should get some equestrian around here. I'll tell you what, man. I know it's not going to happen because, and it's the right decision that Keith Carter and John Cohen are going to make to use the extra additional money to just enhance what you currently have. But I would love the extra $10 million or whatever to start men's soccer and gymnastics.
I've always been told that gymnastics is incredibly expensive to roll out.
Oh, really? Man, it's fun to actually be there.
To start, though, right now, State and Ole Miss would be so far behind. It'd be worse than trying to start a football team right now.
Yeah.
But man, Auburn Arena gets packed for that stuff. And it actually looks like fun, and men's soccer for selfish reasons. I would love to cover and watch college men's soccer around here.